Old Hollywood never really died. It just slipped behind the curtains one star at a time, flashes of cameras, whispers at studio gates, headlines that froze a world built on beauty, fame, and tragedy. These weren't just celebrities. They were legends who defined the golden age of cinema, whose faces lit up silver screens in darkened theaters across the globe, whose names became synonymous with an era of glamour that would never come again. But even immortals face mortality, and when these classic Hollywood icons fell, the world stopped to mourn. Today, we revisit 20 final days. The mornings that began like any other, the phone calls that changed everything, the moments when newsrooms scrambled and fans collapsed in disbelief. From Brentwood bungalows to European hotel rooms, from mountain highways to hospital corridors, these are the stories of how the legends left us. We'll walk through the last hours of Marilyn Monroe, James Dean, Judy Garland, and 17 others whose deaths became as legendary as their lives. We'll hear how the news broke, how the media descended, how fans gathered in silent vigils, and how Hollywood itself paused to acknowledge that something irreplaceable had been lost. These aren't distant historical footnotes. These are real final moments. Ambulances racing through Los Angeles traffic, telegrams arriving at studio offices, radio bulletins interrupting afternoon programming, newspaper presses running overtime to capture the shock. Each death sent ripples through a culture that had built these stars into something larger than life, only to watch them become heartbreakingly human again. The celebrity tragedies of old Hollywood shaped how we understand fame itself, the cost, the isolation, the way even the brightest lights eventually fade. Let's step back into those devastating days when the world learned it had lost its movie legends forever. Marilyn Monroe. Phones lit up Brentwood. August 5th, 1962. By the time the sun rose over Los Angeles, reporters and photographers had already converged on a quiet cul-de-sac in Brentwood. The address, 12305 Fifth Helena Drive, would become one of the most infamous in Hollywood history. Inside, Marilyn Monroe's bedroom door had been locked through the night. When her housekeeper and doctor finally smashed a window to reach her, they found the actress unresponsive, a phone still cradled near her hand. Officials would later cite a fatal overdose. But in those first chaotic hours, nobody could process what was happening. The news hit wire services before dawn. Police switchboards lit up. Studio executives refused to believe it. How could the woman who had just been negotiating her next picture be gone? By mid-morning, crowds gathered outside the small Spanish-style home, held back by police barricades as flashbulbs exploded against the windows. Global front pages ran her face by afternoon. Radio stations played nothing but somber tributes. At Westwood Memorial Park, fans would soon arrive with flowers, tears streaming, unable to reconcile the vibrant image on screen with the reality of loss. The world had lost its most luminous star at just 36, and the shockwave would reverberate for generations. James Dean, A Highway-Side Sunset. September 30th, 1955. The afternoon light was fading along Route 466 near Chelan, California, when James Dean Silver Porsche Spider, nicknamed Little Bastard, collided with another vehicle at an intersection. The 24-year-old actor, racing enthusiast and rising legend, was pronounced dead shortly after impact. He'd been driving to a sports car competition, his mechanic in the passenger seat, the road stretching out like every rebellious dream he'd embodied on screen. In an instant, it all ended. Local radio bulletins crackled through the evening. By nightfall, AP and UPI wires carried the story coast to coast, leading every evening newscast. Disbelief swept through Hollywood. The star of East of Eden and Rebel Without a Cause, with Giant still in post-production, couldn't possibly be gone. But he was. Within hours, makeshift memorials appeared outside movie theaters. Fan clubs formed overnight, devoted to preserving his image. The studio lot fell silent. James Dean had embodied youthful defiance, the ache of misunderstood adolescence, and now he was frozen in time forever, forever young, forever driving into that California twilight. The legend was born the moment the headlights dimmed. Judy Garland. London woke to heartbreak. June 22nd, 1969. A rented Muse house in Belgravia, London, held one of the world's most recognizable voices in its final silence. Judy Garland had spent a low-key day at home before being discovered unresponsive. Emergency services were summoned, but there was nothing to be done. The The woman who had sung Over the Rainbow and captivated audiences for decades was gone at 47. Her private struggles finally ended. British press flashes went out immediately. By morning, American newspapers scrambled to run late editions, and radio tributes rolled throughout the day. Fans left flowers outside her London residence and gathered at the Talk of the Town, where she'd recently performed. In New York, vigils formed spontaneously as people tried to process the loss of Dorothy, of the girl from Meet Me in St. Louis, of a voice that had carried generations through war and peace. The outpouring was global and immediate. Telegrams flooded in from fellow performers, from presidents, from ordinary people whose lives she'd touched. Judy Garland had given everything to her craft, and now the world mourned the toll that fame had taken. Her final bow had come too soon, in a quiet foreign house far from a yellow brick road. Clark Gable, the King's final close-up. November 16, 1960. Hollywood's king died just days after suffering a massive heart event, shortly after wrapping his final film, The Misfits. Clark Gable had been resting at home following hospitalization, with studio friends checking in and trying to stay optimistic. But the rugged image that had defined masculinity on screen couldn't withstand mortality. When the news came, Hollywood trades pushed emergency bulletins. Afternoon papers ran banner headlines. The king is dead. Crowds gathered outside the funeral home. Editorials declared the end of an era, and they weren't wrong. Gable had been Rhett Butler, the man who didn't give a damn, the mustache symbol of old-school movie star charisma. Now theaters scrambled to re-release Gone with the Wind, and audiences packed houses to watch him on screen one more time, knowing they were seeing a ghost. Studio executives stood in shocked silence. The man who'd made millions swoon, who'd survived decades at the top, who'd seemed indestructible, was suddenly impossibly gone at 59. Interest in the Misfits surged, audiences searching for his final performance, trying to hold on to the king just a little longer. But the throne was empty now. Jean Harlow, Hollywood in White. June 7, 1937. Good Samaritan Hospital in Los Angeles became the site of an unthinkable loss. Jean Harlow, the platinum blonde bombshell who'd redefined screen sexuality and comedy, was gone at just 26. She'd been hospitalized days earlier while filming Saratoga at MGM, and the studio had scrambled contingency plans, hoping against hope. When the end came, the news hit the lot like a bomb. Extras and crew reportedly wept openly. Photographers rushed to capture the shock on faces across Hollywood. Fans lined up outside theaters, desperate to see her one more time on screen. Papers ran commemorative photo spreads, image after image of her luminous face, her signature white blonde hair, her knowing smile. MGM made the controversial decision to complete Saratoga using stand-ins and long shots, unable to scrap the project. When it premiered, audiences watched in bittersweet silence, knowing they were seeing a farewell performance assembled from fragments. Jean Harlow had burned bright and fast, the original blonde bombshell, and her death shocked a generation that had believed youth and beauty could last forever. Hollywood learned a cruel lesson that summer. Even goddesses were mortal. Natalie Wood, Night on the Water. The night of November 28th into the 29th, 1981. A weekend boat outing near Santa Catalina Island turned into a nightmare confusion and frantic searching. Natalie Wood, beloved since childhood for Miracle on 34th Street, an iconic in West Side Story, and Rebel Without a Cause, was found in the waters off the California coast. She was pronounced dead on November 29th. The circumstances were murky, late-night events aboard the boat, an unexplained absence, then the devastating discovery. Coastal radio chatter gave way to television bulletin. By morning, the nation woke to stunned coverage. Questions emerged immediately, and candlelight gatherings formed across Los Angeles as fans tried to make sense of the loss. Natalie would have been Hollywood royalty from age 4, her huge dark eyes and genuine warmth making her one of the industry's most enduring stars. Now, at 43, she was gone under mysterious circumstances that would spark speculation for decades. The outpouring of grief was matched only by confusion. How had this happened? The woman who'd survived and thrived through every era of Hollywood had drowned on a quiet November night, and the void she left was unfathomable. Carole Lombard, Bond tour turns to mourning. January 16th, 1942. America was newly at war, and Carol Lombard had just completed a triumphant war bond rally in the Midwest, raising over $2 million. She was flying home to Los Angeles, her patriotic duty fulfilled, her energy boundless. But the TWA airliner never made it. Near Las Vegas, at Potosi Mountain, the plane struck terrain in the night. There were no survivors. The screwball comedy queen, the woman who could make audiences laugh until they cried, was dead at 33. War-era radio carried the news with a gravity that transcended typical celebrity coverage. President Roosevelt issued personal condolences. Newspapers devoted front pages to her loss, framing it as a national tragedy. Carol Lombard had been doing her part for the war effort, and now she'd become its victim in the cruelest twist. Bond drives were dedicated in her name. MGM held a massive memorial. Her husband, Clark Gable, was shattered. The country mourned not just a movie star, but a patriot who'd given everything. In the midst of global conflict, her death became a rallying point, a reminder that war touched everyone, even the brightest lights of Hollywood. She'd sold bonds to protect America, and America would never forget. Humphrey Bogart, the tough guy's quiet exit. January 14th, 1957. The tough guy died quietly at home in Holmby Hills, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Humphrey Bogart had been resting, Lauren Bacall nearby, close friends checking in during those final days. When the end came, it was with the same understated dignity he brought to every role. Studio and family statements went out. Black-bordered tributes appeared in newspapers. America woke to the realization that Rick Blaine, Sam Spade, and a laconic hero of 100 noir classics was gone at 57. Film houses immediately programmed Casablanca retrospectives. Lines snaked around city blocks as audiences rushed to see Bogart on screen again, to hear that gravelly voice, to watch him light a cigarette in the shadows one more time. The man who'd made cynicism romantic, who'd turned world weariness into an art form, had exited without fuss. There was something fitting about that. No histrionics, no public spectacle, just a quiet room and the people he loved. Hollywood dimmed its lights. Radio stations played scenes from his films. And in living rooms across America, people who'd grown up with Bogey on screen felt like they'd lost a friend. He'd been the definition of cool before the word meant what it does now. And his absence left cinema a little less sharp, a little less dangerous. Rita Hayworth, A City Says Goodbye. May 14th, 1987. New York City prepared to say farewell to one of its most glamorous daughters. Rita Hayworth, the woman who made Gilda an erotic touchstone and CoverGirl a Technicolor dream, passed away with family at her side. Her long public struggle with memory illness had raised awareness about a cruel disease, humanizing a woman the world had previously known only as a screen goddess. Now, at 68, the battle was over. NYC press carried the news with reverence. National evening broadcasts ran tribute packages featuring her iconic dance sequences, the gloves coming off in Gilda, the radiant smile that had captivated millions. Vigils formed in Washington Heights and the Upper West Side, fans lighting candles and sharing memories. Alzheimer's advocacy organizations saw a surge in attention. Rita Hayworth's willingness to let the public see her struggle had changed perceptions of the disease. She'd been Hollywood's love goddess, but her final act was to show vulnerability, to prove that even legends face mortality with grace. The city that had celebrated her beauty now mourned her loss, remembering not just the glamour, but the courage it took to fade from public view with dignity intact. Errol Flynn, A Sudden Fade to Black. October 14th, 1959. Vancouver, British Columbia, was not where anyone expected the great swashbuckler to fall. Errol Flynn had been in town regarding the sale of his yacht, visiting a private residence, when he suddenly felt unwell. The man who dueled across pirate ships and led charges in countless adventure films collapsed and could not be revived. At 50, the legendary Captain Blood was gone. Canadian radio broke the story first. Within minutes, Hollywood trades picked it up, and shockwaves rippled through the industry. Errol Flynn, reckless, charismatic, larger than life, had seemed immune to ordinary mortality. Newsreels immediately assembled retrospectives of his most daring on-screen moments, the athletic grace, the devil-may-care grin. Rain fell on Vancouver sidewalks as word spread. In Los Angeles, Studio executives shook their heads in disbelief. Flynn had lived hard and fast, the epitome of adventurous masculinity. And now he'd exited with the same sudden drama he brought to every role. Fans mourned not just an actor, but an archetype, fearless hero who made danger look effortless. The swashbuckler had taken his final bow in a quiet Canadian house, far from the sound stages and sword fights, but his legend would never fade. Grace Kelly, a princess, a mountain road. September 13th, 1982. A steep, winding road above the Monaco coast became the scene of unthinkable tragedy. Princess Grace, still known to the world as Grace Kelly, the cool blonde of Hitchcock masterpieces, lost control of her car on a hairpin turn. The vehicle left the road and tumbled down the hillside. She was rushed to Princess Grace Hospital, but the injuries were catastrophic. On September 14th, the world learned that the fairy tale had ended. She was 52. European television interrupted regular programming. Global coverage followed within hours. Monaco went into immediate mourning, and the tiny principality's streets filled with shocked, grieving citizens. Lines of mourners stretched for blocks. The state funeral was broadcast worldwide, watched by millions who remember her transformation from Hollywood royalty to actual royalty. Grace Kelly had seemed to live a storybook existence, from Oscar-winning actress to princess bride, and now it had ended on a mountain road in the harsh light of reality. Flowers piled up outside the palace. Hitchcock films aired in tribute marathons. The woman who brought icy elegance to Rear Window and To Catch a Thief was gone, and the world struggled to accept that even princesses were vulnerable to fate's cruelty. Montgomery Clift. The apartment went still. July 23, 1966. A New York City townhouse held its breath. Montgomery Clift, the actor who'd revolutionized screen acting with his vulnerable intensity, spent a quiet evening at home. When he was found unresponsive, emergency services responded quickly, but it was too late. The man who brought raw emotion to A Place in the Sun, From Here to Eternity, and The Misfits was gone at 45, his tortured artistry finally at rest. Morning papers and AP wires carried the news. Colleagues issued statements remembering his transformative post-war performances, the way he'd made masculinity vulnerable and complex. Vigils formed outside his building, fans leaving flowers and notes. Revival screenings were hastily organized, audiences packing theaters to watch Clift's face, that beautiful, haunted face, work its magic one more time. Critics wrote elegies about how American acting had changed because of him, how Brando and Dean had followed where he led. Montgomery Clift had never sought the spotlight the way other stars did. He'd been a private man devoted to his craft. His final calm was fitting, somehow, a quiet exit for a man who'd spent his career turning internal turmoil into cinematic gold. The apartment went still, but the performances would echo forever. Bette Davis, the final close-up in Europe. October 6, 1989. Neuilly-sur-Seine, France, became the unlikely setting for Hollywood royalty's final moments. Bette Davis had been traveling after film festival appearances, her health fragile but her spirit undiminished. The woman who clawed her way to the top of Warner Brothers, who'd fought for better roles and won 2 Oscars, who'd made those eyes a trademark, passed away far from the Hollywood she dominated for decades. She was 81. European press carried the news first. Then U.S. networks devoted their weekend programming to career montages. Clips rolled of her most iconic moments. All About Eve, Jezebel, Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, that face, those gestures, that eye on full display. Fans placed roses on her Hollywood Walk of Fame star. Headlines played on the eyes motif, acknowledging what everyone knew. You didn't look away when Bette Davis was on screen. She'd outlasted the studio system, survived changing tastes, and reinvented herself again and again. Her death felt like the definitive end of an era, the last of the true warriors from Hollywood's golden age, the woman who'd refused to be anything less than a force of nature. She'd earned her final close-up, and she'd taken on her own terms. Ingrid Bergman, A Birthday Candle in London. August 29, 1982. It was her 67th birthday. Ingrid Bergman spent the day at her London home, surrounded by family, the hours peaceful and gentle. The woman who captivated audiences in Casablanca, Notorious, and Anastasia, 3 continents, 3 Oscars, 1 luminous career, passed away with the same grace she brought to every role. When the news broke through British press in the morning and spread worldwide by midday, the tributes reflected both her towering artistry and the complicated journey she'd taken to achieve it. Balanced obituaries acknowledged the early scandal that had temporarily derailed her American career, then celebrated her triumphant return and sustained excellence. Flowers appeared outside theaters running Casablanca revivals, fans mourning Ilse Lund as much as the actress who played her. Ingrid Bergman had been natural where others were affected, honest where others were manufactured. Her beauty was radiant but approachable, her talent undeniable but never ostentatious. On her final birthday, as candles flickered in a London home, the world lost one of cinema's most genuine presences. The outpouring was global and heartfelt. Millions who'd grown up watching her on screen felt the loss personally. She'd been Hollywood's conscience, and now that voice was silent. Spencer Tracy, Early Morning in Beverly Hills. June 10, 1967. Beverly Hills woke to devastating news. Spencer Tracy had passed away at home in the early morning hours, with Katharine Hepburn nearby during those final moments. Emergency response had been called at dawn, but the man who'd won back-to-back Oscars and defined screen naturalism for 4 decades was gone at 67. The announcement hit Hollywood like a punch to the gut. Bulletins interrupted morning radio. Flags lowered to half-staff at studio lots. Theaters across the country dimmed their lights in tribute. The press immediately highlighted the Tracy-Hepburn partnership, 9 films together, a screen chemistry that seemed effortless and eternal. Now it was over. Spencer Tracy had made acting look easy, which meant he was doing it right. No scenery chewing, no grandstanding, just truth in every frame. Critics scrambled to find words for what made him special, often settling on honest or real because that's what he was. Colleagues issued statements praising his craftsmanship, his professionalism, his decency. The details of his final hours were kept discreet. The privacy he'd always valued protected even in death. Hollywood had lost one of its finest, and the silence that followed felt appropriate. No grand gestures, just respect for a master craftsman who'd left too soon. Greta Garbo, New York's most private farewell. April 15, 1990. New York Hospital became the setting for the most private of exits. Greta Garbo, the woman who'd made reclusiveness an art form, spent her final hours with close family only. The world kept a careful distance just as she'd always wanted. When the family issued a brief notice, press outlets relied on file footage, grainy shots of her walking New York streets in sunglasses and scarves, forever avoiding the cameras that had once made her a goddess. Fans left flowers near her East Side apartment building. "I want to be alone," headlined newspapers worldwide, the famous misquote from Grand Hotel serving as her epitaph. At 84, Garbo had outlived the Hollywood she'd abandoned, remaining an enigma until the end. The outpouring was muted, respectful, tinged with mystery, just as she would have wanted. Revival houses screened Ninotchka and Anna Karenina. Audiences mesmerized by that face, those eyes, the magnetic presence that had made her a silent film star and then a talky legend. She'd walked away from it all in 1941 and never looked back, living on her own terms in Manhattan anonymity. City sidewalks glistened with spring rain. Long lenses had finally lost their subject. The world's most private star had taken her final bow behind closed doors, leaving only the films and the legend. A.V.A. Gardner, A Last Quiet London Morning. January 25, 1990. A London home fell silent. Ava Gardner, sultry icon of film noir and melodrama, passed away with house staff present and a doctor summoned too late. She was 67, and she'd spent her later years in London, away from the Hollywood glare, living with a dignity that matched the fierce independence she'd always shown. When the announcement came later that day, UK radio bulletins led, followed by US evening news packages thick with Sinatra-era nostalgia and clips from The Killers and Magambo. Fans gathered outside her London residence, Spanish and UK, press emphasizing her European years and her deep connection to Spain. Ava Gardner had been breathtaking on screen, Those cheekbones, that voice, the smoldering intensity. But she'd also been smart, tough, and unwilling to play Hollywood's games. She'd married legends, lived hard, and emerged with her sense of self intact. Now, in a quiet London morning, she was gone. The tributes flowed. Remembrances of her beauty, yes, but also her wit, her refusal to be diminished, her ability to command the screen with a single glance. Theaters played her films in memoriam. Audiences reminded of a time when movie stars carried an aura of danger and unpredictability. Ava Gardner had been one of a kind, and London had given her the peaceful exit she deserved. Lana Turner, curtain call in Los Angeles. June 29, 1995. Los Angeles said goodbye to one of its most enduring glamour queens. Lana Turner passed away at home with family present, the end of a health decline that had been known to the public for some time. At 74, the sweater girl who became a platinum-haired symbol of Hollywood sophistication was gone. Los Angeles local news broke the story, and by morning, national shows were running career retrospectives heavy on The Postman Always Rings Twice and Peyton Place. Flowers appeared at her Walk of Fame star. Within hours, reminiscences flooded in about Golden Age glamour, about the star system that had discovered her at a drugstore counter and turned her into royalty. Lana Turner's life had been tabloid fodder. The marriages, the daughter's involvement in a notorious incident, but her screen presence had always transcended the headlines. She'd been luminous, vulnerable beneath the gloss, and audiences had stayed loyal through every scandal and comeback. Now Hollywood mourned one of its last living links to the studio era, when stars were manufactured and maintained with fierce precision. The curtain fell on Lana Turner with flowers, memories, and a recognition that an entire way of making movies had died with her generation. Los Angeles had built her, and Los Angeles would remember. Gary Cooper, A Gentleman's Goodbye. May 13, 1961. Beverly Hills lost a gentleman. Gary Cooper passed away at home, close family and clergy having visited in the preceding days, preparing for the inevitable. When the family statement reached wire services, it was met with a profound national sadness. Church bells tolled in his Montana hometown. America felt like it had lost something essential, a version of itself. Maybe the strong, silent type who embodied decency and courage without needing to announce it. Cooper was 60. Editorials poured in praising his restraint, his naturalism, the way he'd made heroism look effortless in films like High Noon and Sergeant York. Television stations replayed his westerns, audiences watching him walk down dusty streets one more time, square-jawed and righteous. Gary Cooper had been America's everyman raised to mythic status, the cowboy who stood his ground, the soldier who did his duty. His death felt personal to millions who'd grown up with him on screen. There was no scandal, no controversy, just a life well-lived and a career that had defined American masculinity at its most aspirational. The gentleman had said goodbye with characteristic grace, and the country paused to acknowledge that Hollywood's golden era had lost one of its brightest pillars. Montana church bells echoed across the plains. The sheriff had ridden into his final sunset. Elizabeth Taylor, The World's Last Violet Eyes. March 23, 2011. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles became the focal point for a global vigil. Elizabeth Taylor, the woman with violet eyes who'd been a star since childhood and an icon for 7 decades, passed away with family at her bedside. Her health struggles had been public knowledge for years, but when the family representative released a statement to the Associated Press, the outpouring was immediate and massive. Social media, something that hadn't existed for most of her career, flooded with tributes within minutes. Global news networks devoted hours to her legacy, balancing the glamour and gossip with serious recognition of her AIDS activism. Landmarks lit up in purple across multiple cities. Elizabeth Taylor had been the last true movie star in the classical sense. Beautiful beyond reason, talented, temperamental, married 8 times, dripping in jewels, and unafraid to use her fame for humanitarian causes. She'd survived and thrived through every era of Hollywood, from child star to tabloid queen to respected elder. Now, at 79, she was gone and the world recognized it had lost not just a celebrity, but a force of nature. Cedars-Sinai's corridors filled with flowers. Fans gathered outside, holding candles and photographs. The woman who played Cleopatra had taken her final bow, and Hollywood felt smaller, less magical, without her. The violet eyes were closed forever, but the legend would never fade. Cameras fade, headlines yellow, but the names remain. 20 legends, 20 final days, 20 moments when Hollywood stopped and the world held its breath. From Marilyn's locked bedroom to James Dean's Twilight Highway, from Judy's London house to Grace's Mountain Road, each death became another story Hollywood couldn't stop telling. They were sudden, shocking, or serene, but every ending transformed into mythology, another layer added to already legendary lives. These weren't just obituaries. They were cultural earthquakes. When Jean Harlow died at 26, America learned that even goddesses were mortal. When Carole Lombard's plane crashed during a war bond tour, she became a patriotic martyr. When Natalie Wood disappeared into dark waters off Catalina, mystery became part of her legacy forever. The way these stars died, the circumstances, the reactions, the media frenzies, taught Hollywood how to mourn, how to memorialize, how to turn tragedy into eternal remembrance. What strikes most powerfully about these final days is how fame made even death part of performance. Flashbulbs outside Marilyn's home, crowds at Humphrey Bogart's funeral, Princess Grace's state ceremony broadcast worldwide, Elizabeth Taylor's passing marked by purple-lit skyscrapers and viral hashtags. These weren't private moments. They couldn't be. The public demanded a piece of the grief, needed to feel connected to the loss. The stars had given their lives to entertaining millions, and in return, millions claimed the right to participate in saying goodbye. Yet beneath the spectacle were real human endings. Quiet rooms in Beverly Hills, hospital corridors in New York, a London flat at dawn, final breaths taken with family nearby, beyond the reach of cameras and headlines. The legends were people first, flawed, struggling, aging mortal. Their deaths remind us that all the glamour, all the fame, all the adoration couldn't save them from being human. That's what makes these stories so powerful and so heartbreaking. Hollywood never recovered from losing these 20. It evolved, changed, found new stars, but something essential died with each of them, a particular kind of charisma, a specific era's ideal of beauty or masculinity, a way of moving to the world that can't be replicated. We can watch their films forever, freeze-frame their faces, memorize their voices, but we can't bring them back. The day they died, something irreplaceable slipped away. In their last hours, they became eternal.